Welcome to Variations 4, Lights and pH unit. We're covering questions number 23 to 26 in this video. That'll be an overview of serum calcium, magnesium, and albumin. So in covering number 23 and 24, let's move to maps 8 and 9. We're talking about calcium here. So 4 functions of calcium are listed there on the map. My first question for you is, why is osmolality not listed there? Why? Remember, sodium and potassium were big players in osmolality. Why is calcium not? Calcium does not appear in the same degree of concentration as the other two. It doesn't appear to be a key player in the shift of fluids. So osmolality is not really a huge factor when we think of calcium. However, when we look at the first two, again, we're seeing that theme return of neuromuscular functioning, which we talked about earlier, which could be applied to probably all of the electrolytes. Again, we're looking at cardiac arrhythmias as a potential outcome of abnormal calcium levels as well. And then we have 2 unique features of calcium, which come down to blood clotting and bone and teeth formation. So let's talk about increased serum levels of calcium. A lot of these should be pretty obvious here at the top, these rectangles at the top with your meds, diuretics. We know what vitamin D does, how it helps how it helps calcium absorb. We've talked about PTH and its role in calcium in a previous video. And you should know from previous experience how mobilization or decreased mobilization, what effect that has on the bones. So if someone's not mobilizing enough, what happens? You get what's called bone resorption, and what that means is calcium starts to leave the bone and enter the bloodstream. There's 2 problems that come from that. What are they? One of them is whatever the symptoms that come with increased serum calcium levels, and the other problem is a weakening of bones known as osteoporosis. Bone tumors is kind of the same idea in that tumors cause bone destruction, which in and of itself is painful and problematic in terms of the musculoskeletal system. It's also adding calcium to the bloodstream. All right, so just a few of the symptoms listed here under the triangle. And the circle talks about what the medical team may want to do. You've heard of this medication up here at the top. You've probably seen it in long-term care. Might want to give IV fluids to flush the system out. Lasix is sometimes helps remove your lights as well. There's dietary issues. There's hormones that we can take in medication form to lower calcium. Then there's, of course, activity. All kind of follows intuitively if you think about the causes at the top. How about decreased serum calcium levels? Well, again, the only one that's probably not obvious here at the top is pancreatitis. And basically, the long story short of pancreatitis is that calcium binds with the lipase that is, the enzymes that are released from the pancreas in pancreatitis. And basically, when it binds with that, it changes form and is no longer calcium. So that's in a nutshell how pancreatitis contributes to a lower serum calcium level. Again, the triangle just kind of listed some of the more drastic symptoms. Again, what are we looking at here? Musculoskeletal, cardiac arrhythmias. Hopefully, the record is starting to sound like it's repeating. What do we do here in the circle? Well, if you think of the causes, and I'm hoping that these 3 interventions make absolute perfect sense. Okay, on to magnesium, question 25 and 20, actually just 25, and then we go to protein in 26. So 25, talking about magnesium. What can cause increased serum magnesium levels? Hoping these two rectangles up here at the top are pretty obvious. What are our symptoms at the triangle? Wow, talk about themes that repeat themselves. You got your neuromuscular, you've got your cardiac function, and really your LOC and RR are just kind of following from that in a lot of ways. The calcium gluconate was mentioned earlier above for cardiac arrhythmias. What can we do as a team to avoid things getting that far? Again, I'm hoping these three interventions make perfect sense as you read through them. They seem pretty intuitive. When we talk about lowered serum magnesium, again, a lot of these reasons of causation should be pretty obvious. We'll talk more about the role of alcohol and vitamins, nutrients, and general neurological functioning when we get to the GI accessory organs unit. So we'll get a little more into this later on. Just for now, we can take it at face value that alcoholism, by way of decreased poor dietary intake and increased diuresis, contributes to lowered magnesium. And we'll get more into that in a later unit. The other one should make fairly good sense here. Again, remember, with that increased blood sugar, you get diuresis, and diuresis can end up in a result of loss of key electrolytes as well. All right, so a little bit on the circle, what can we do to help? The CWA, Ativan thing, I'm really looking at it from the alcoholism point of view. Again, that's something we'll get more into later on. The PO IV magnesium is really intuitive. And then again, the triangles, well, hey, same old story here, neuromuscular cardiac arrhythmias. Our last question here, number 26. For this video is asking us to talk about protein, specifically albumin in the bloodstream, and what role that plays on fluid shifts. So we've got a couple of reasons here, and these rectangles I'm hovering around, for a cause in a drop in serum albumin. And we'll get into both of those rectangles, specifics of those, in later units. For now, we can take it at face value that they'll contribute to a lowered serum albumin. Albumin is a protein. It's a major player in oncotic pull inside the vascular space. So to such a degree that what happens if you lower serum albumin? You guessed it, your fluid's going to shift out of your vessels to your tissues with obvious symptoms in the triangle. What can we do in the circle to try and combat this problem while increasing protein intake? Don't want to do that too much if there's hepatic failure, but just kind of hold that thought for a later unit. And if it makes sense, an albumin transfusion. And what do I mean by if it makes sense? Well, if it's the right time. For example, if someone's got major burns, you might give albumin in an emergency situation to bump up the blood pressure temporarily. You might do that, but in not very short time later, sorry, not a very long time later, that albumin is going to be going right back into the bloodstream. Why is that? We'll talk about that when we talk about burns. But yes, generally speaking, an albumin transfusion will raise up serum albumin, even if only temporarily. The bottom line is you got to look at what the underlying problem is here. So guess what? Here's a question for you. What does albumin and sodium have in common? Can you make a commentary on sodium and albumin and the dynamics of fluid shifts? Can you draw some parallels between sodium and albumin? Let me give you a hint. Think of dehydration. And then think about what's happening with albumin. Before I answer that, let's look at some of the parallels. Both sodium and albumin. So number one, both sodium and albumin have major oncotic pull when they're in a high enough concentration. 2, both primarily reside or will be found in their highest concentrations where? Inside the vasculature. And so therefore the conclusion really is they are key players. They have the oncotic pull inside of the vasculature. So if serum protein is high because of dehydration, again, don't forget, in extreme dehydration, the big problem, despite, as well as the discomfort and whatnot, the big problem is that, well, 2 things. Blood pressure drops, and so you're not getting perfusion to key organs. Sure. The other problem is if your dehydration is severe enough, water is drawn out of the brain cells, out of cells in general, to try and rehydrate, and that can cause neurological dysfunction. Why is that? Because the increased serum protein has increased oncotic pull. It's now become a hypertonic environment. Anyways, the long story short is the circle is, of course, rehydrate if that's your only issue. All right, that concludes the video for this portion of the unit.